Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce our second plenary, Andrea Kocsis, from the University of Edinburgh. Andrea originally hails from Hungary, but has been in the UK for over 10 years now, and is currently a Chancellor Fellow of Humanities Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. So she is a computational person, but the fact that one is a computer person, a computational person, doesn't mean that she wouldn't be able to take her studies to the field. I also asked what other studies she has been conducting, and she told me that she also has done field work into the tastes of castle walls recently, for example. But I think today we're going to be hearing more about computational digital humanities. Right, so without further ado, please.
Moving. Hi, good morning, and thank you for this absolutely, indeed, humbling opportunity to discuss a rather controversial topic with you, because the presentation I brought to you today, More Than a Feeling, and the title of it, More Than a Feeling, Can Digital Humanities Rewrite Concepts from Non-Digital Heritage Studies, is not only unnecessarily long, but also intentionally an open question. Because what I brought to you today is a cautionary tale about what can go wrong if we approach digital humanities without triangulation or control in our methodology, or with too much reliance on methods which were not necessarily developed to the field where we are applying them, and in general too much confidence in technology, or vice versa, when we approach humanities with loose methodology. And I would also like to touch on existing or non-existing boundaries between supposed binaries, like quantitative and qualitative, close and distant reading, methods and hermeneutics. However, instead of having a one-way talk, I'd like to use this very privileged position to open a discussion, because the case study I'd like to use as a prompt to discuss the above issues is just a prompt. It's detecting emotions in medieval dark heritage reviews, and it is coming from my home discipline, heritage studies. I would like to ask you to be mindful that there are trigger warnings for this talk: suicide, war, religious violence, and images of human remains. So if you are sensitive about these topics, please be mindful about them. But before we get there, I find it important to position where I'm coming from. My background is in a variety of humanities disciplines, from archaeology to media studies, which accumulated in me specializing in an interdisciplinary field, heritage studies. However, I ended up working in data science and design informatics without a formal institutional disciplinary training in computer science. Therefore, the problem I present here, which is inherently extremely interdisciplinary, might have some disciplinary solutions I'm unaware of, and I'm very happy to be introduced to. However, if an oversight like this happens, it will just emphasize my point on the hidden barriers within interdisciplinarity, the need for developing the tools along their hermeneutics, and the need for combined humanities and computer science training for DH professionals. And all these points, as well as my overall talk, resonate on many levels with this incredible volume that have been published recently, and unfortunately I have nothing to do with this. But I'd like to highlight some state-of-the-art points of the book to which my position and my case study is relevant. Firstly, Ringel highlights the critical need to make computational methodologies transparent and accessible to traditional humanists by considering how to interpret the results while developing the methodologies themselves. Having the method and its application correspond is crucial for my case study. Then Damarov and colleagues sound the alarm on the elephant in the room of computational humanities, namely the poor coding quality, which not only distorts research outcomes, but also hinders progress in the field. They attribute this problem to the lack of institutional training, which forces humanist scholars to resort to self-teaching. As a solution, they advocate for working in collaborative teams, in contrast to the traditional model of the solitary humanities scholar, like how I did this research. And they also advocate for more interdisciplinary institutional support to do these collaborative studies together. And my case shows that more awareness on the coding level and closer collaboration of the disciplines should be crucial. And finally, Algy Hewitt, in the very provocative chapter 2, urges scholars to do the exact opposite of what I did in this case study, to question theoretical models through quantitative results, rather than treating them as a merely imperfect proxies of life. This perspective challenges the conventional notions of realness in humanities and in computation, and also challenges my own case study too. However, I let you be the judge. If the results contradict each other, which can we trust more, the quantitative analysis or the qualitative model? In my talk, first I will explain why I chose this topic. Then I introduce the heritage theoretical problem I wanted to solve with the research, and give an overview of the results of my qualitative analysis, before I elaborate on the distant reading, and I explain, spoiler alert, why it did not work. I will start from the humanities. It will be very humanities at the beginning, but it will end up digital by the end, I promise. Please bear with me. And you can find this case study if you are interested in this forthcoming book soon. So why am I doing this? In each digital humanities research project, my driving beacon is finding a balance between reliability and validity. These terms differentiate between those qualities of research which decide if a study runs methodologically correctly, aka reliably, and/or reflects reality, which is validity. They equivalent to accuracy and precision. So finding a balance between them is key in digital humanities. And as digital methods and automation tend to imbalance the two. On the one hand, computation can help with data collection, speed, precision, repeatability of the research, while discovering hidden patterns that the human eye cannot see in the given time or amount of data. On the other hand, if you don't pay enough attention, then digital methods can lead to less valid results, not necessarily reflecting the real world, which means basically trading validity for reliability. And that's what I would like to warn against in this talk. And this problem led me to the main questions, like would grounding research in more data would lead to more validity? Would using semi-automated or automated methods lead to more reliable results? Should we trust qualitative results over quantitative ones, or the opposite? And should we do it in all cases? However, the case study of the project came from observing a humanities problem, which I would like to briefly introduce now. So, I did this research to test David Uzzell's theory. Uzzell coined the term hot interpretation, a way of exhibiting an exhibition that makes visitors of dark heritage sites of violence and trauma emotionally interpret the experience without thinking it over. It's what other heritage researchers call affect, okay? But Uzzell thinks that affect is reduced if the event is far in time and space. He says, as time separates us from past events, our emotional engagement is reduced. And as a medievalist, it hurt. So I wanted to look into how we came to this conclusion. Do we really not feel for distant sites of trauma? Is it really not true that we don't have emotions towards a medieval site? And as I dissected the study, I found a methodological oversight with it, as he compared the observation of one medieval site, the Clifford Tower in York, which I'm going to introduce in details later, to 6 sites of recent violence and traumas. Besides, he used only observation, personal observation, and didn't ground his analysis in further data collection. So I had this fear that he might have confused correlation with causation, because it might be true that the visitors don't experience hot interpretation, don't react emotionally at the Clifford Tower, but I don't think it's because the violence there happened in the distant past, but because the curation and the storytelling did not induce it. So my hypothesis is, in a nutshell, that curation and storytelling have a major impact on how affective heritage sites are, and this impact is more important than distance in time and space. So that's the theory I wanted to prove or challenge. But how to do it? First of all, I wanted data, and a lot of it. And there was similar research before. Laura Jane Smith did an amazing user research at former plantation sites and slavery museums, interviewing thousands and thousands of people. But that is extremely time and resource consuming. And most importantly, I did not really want to spend that much time talking to people. So I wondered where I could get large-scale extant data about people's experiences at heritage sites that can replace interviews. What do you think where? Yes, I thought that I will try TripAdvisor. Because, I thought that maybe it's worth trying if TripAdvisor reviews are suitable replacements or not. It must be pointed out that researching heritage affect is highly challenging, even in the case of immediate on-site data collection. But when using distant, extant data, like TripAdvisor reviews, it's necessary to acknowledge its limitations, namely that these reviews are already mediated and have their own agendas, separate from the research objectives. However, concerning their benefits, the researcher does not interfere to trigger an effect and can entirely avoid guided questions. Nonetheless, it's important to keep in mind that we are able to observe only a reflection of a potential effect felt in the past, not the effect per se. But, if I recount, if in this otherwise extremely operational context, like a TripAdvisor review, which is mostly about ticket prices and parking space, if I can point out strong emotions there, then it is a good sign of being effective. But you can debate me on that too. I collected reviews from 3 sites of distant trauma that employed very different curatorial techniques and storytelling. As a first step, I analyzed the storytelling techniques, the arrangements, the displays of the 3 case study exhibits to establish the heritage site's intended narrative with on-site observation. So what is going on in the museum? Secondly, I collected the reviews from TripAdvisor with the help of web scraping. Then I applied natural language processing methods I will discuss later, as well as close reading to the reviews in search of affect. And finally, I overlapped the observed curatorial techniques and the results of both close and distant reading of the reviews to see what factors might impact hot cognition at these sites of atrocities from the far past. And we can see that the data set was not entirely balanced. There were different nature of the exhibitions and different number of reviews could be collected about them. Therefore, not all the methods were applicable or comparable to each other. But when this difference matters, I am going to highlight it. The part I want to talk about now is that as part of analyzing the reviews, I contrasted the results of the traditional analog close reading to the results of the computational emotion detection. And the results were concerning. And in the following, I will explain how I got there. We will elaborate on the exhibition strategies, then unravel the signs of affect in the review discourses, established by the close reading. Then I will elaborate on the methods to explore or detect affect computationally. And finally, we will evaluate the results and lessons learned from the dissonance between the close and distant reading of the reviews. Or we don't. Andreas, can you help me, please?
Is the magic button?
The magic button is not working anymore. You see, over-reliance on technology. That's what I'm talking about. Oh, there is a mouse there.
That's new.
Did I push something while I was talking? Didn't I?
No. Okay, tech guy. Come here. Okay, he's coming.
Super.
Yeah, I don't think me pressing it a few more times than you did this is going to fix it.
You know, more people on the stage can help.
The battery is on, like it gives the laser thing. Oh,
it happened. Something happened. I don't know what you did. Can you please reproduce that on the next slide?
I didn't do anything.
Okay.
But
it's now the slide I wanted to have.
okay, but can you get the?
Oh.
Now it's just going to get. To here.
Oh, it's working.
It's working.
It's now worked.
Okay, he fixed it. Okay, very good.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, it's in the following slide, it's not funny at all. Because before we get there, I would like to shortly introduce the case studies. These are sites of horrible human tragedies from the distant past. I kept Uzzell's original, the Clifford Tower, which was an 11th century site of a medieval pogrom against Jews, which resulted in the people locked in the keep committing familicide and suicide to escape the perpetrators, which led to the death of 150 people. The Medieval Museum in Southampton tells the story of a ship which accidentally sank, in which 500 people perished. And the Medieval Massacre exhibition at the Swedish History Museum in Stockholm exhibits the story of a 14th century battle, the Battle of Visby, where 1,800 unarmed farmers died in the Danish invasion. And we see that these are all tragedies. But I wanted to explore how visitors react to these sites when these tragedies are exhibited or not exhibited to them. Here you also can see some reference points which these exhibitions could use to anchor the effect. So about the exhibitions themselves, because it's not a heritage conference, I try to keep it short and I promise that we are going to get to the digital. It's enough to see now that the 3 case studies represent 3 different stages of these hot interpretation techniques. So the Clifford Tower remains the most neutral. The Mary Rose Museum uses a balance of exhibiting both life and death, while the Medieval Massacre Room intentionally uses a variety of aviable curatorial techniques to shock the visitor. The Clifford Tower storytelling is building history focused, with no emphasis on the massacre of the Jews. The exhibition was recently rebuilt, but most of the reviews were from pre-renovation, therefore I wanted to consider both states of the exhibition. So while the renovation addressed some access issues and opened up more space for understanding and appreciating the building's history, their installation did not change the result or the outcome concerning the hot interpretation of the massacre. Although before the renovation there was no information available inside about the massacre, the event received a mention on a plaque in the new installation, which you can see there. Nevertheless, it's safe to say that the exhibition does not focus on the event, mainly because it is concerned with the built heritage, which is not continuous with the timber building witnessing the pogrom on the same site. The information on the massacre is available in the guidebook. However, the site's main story and message are not curated around it. Hence, the exhibition does not use the above-mentioned reference points to anchor affect or apply storytelling techniques concerning the massacre. Unlike the second case study, the Mary Rose Museum, its storytelling focuses on the lost lives to balance out the awe-inducing effect of the jaw-dropping material culture. Although it has an advantage with its unique material culture, the skeleton of the monumental wreck and the plenty of artifacts, the museum does not rely solely on them. It uses its richness to prompt a story to tell. Storytelling starts immediately upon entry, before any contact with the material culture. Visitors can get only intimate access in small groups, and each group has a guide in the first room to frame their understanding. Upon entry, the visitors are part of a projected installation of syncing with the ship, aiming at an immersive embodiment of the experience. Sonic and audio-visual installations are used throughout the exhibition to help the embodiment, complementing the real-life sensory contacts, such as the scent of the conserved wood, the ambient lights, the touchable original and replica objects, pushing the visitor onto a phenomenological route of consuming heritage. From the start, with the help of clustering the excavated material around the individual crew members, the storytelling focuses on the lost lives and not only on the rupture of death. By focusing on life, the exhibition safely plays its cards, balancing between managing the immense impact of the shipwreck, the tear-inducing, sometimes shock-value details, like Hatch, the dog skeleton, or the remains of the anti-board netting causing the crew to drown, and introducing the life of those who perished. The museum has the challenge to avoid relying solely on this awe effect, because in the storytelling, the museum gaze is evoked by a rich material culture and the shipwreck, but it comes only after setting the agenda. Namely, it is not only infotainment, but the site of a cemetery, providing a fertile soil for hot cognition and affect. Then, in the final case study, the Medieval Massacre room, it goes headfirst into hot interpretation, very intentionally, using every available curatorial tool to emphasize the message that war is horrible whenever it happens. The exhibition is part of the Swedish History Museum in Stockholm and tells multiple stories, the museum itself. So it has to overcome some disadvantages in emotional engagement. Firstly, it has to satisfy both local and international visitors with a national collection. It has to rely on material culture in display cases without spatial authenticity to the event. And because it's a pre-modern collection, it obviously has to deal with the main issue of my talk, that it's really relatable to the everyday visitor. But to overcome all of this, the Medieval Massacre room embraces affect-inducive storytelling. The room has an explicit curatorial agenda to prove, I quote, that acts of violence and war are recurrent, destructive phenomena throughout the ages, end quote. So they aim to achieve this recognition via hot interpretation instead of explanation. Therefore, the exhibition uses human remains, material culture, excavation photos, audiovisuals, and primary source-based storytelling to provoke an affective message, helping to transmit this anti-war message. Yep. So if you put these techniques on the scale, the Medieval Massacre room is fully based on affect-induced storytelling. The Mary Rose keeps a careful balance between the human stories and the material culture, and the Clifford Tower is just a stone keep. There is so much to say about the close reading, but it is enough to know that in the case of York, while minimal reviews showed any signs of affect, those who knew about the tragedy demonstrated an affinity for reacting, which could have been further triggered by proper storytelling. So most of the comments focused on the view and logistical frustrations, like pricing and difficulty with the stairs, which actually the topic modeling picked up beautifully. And out of the 2030 reviews, only 60 mentioned the site's Jewish history. And these reviews fell into three main categories. The factual acknowledgement of the massacre, but without affect, frustration at the lack of historical context in the exhibition, and sensitivity to the site's potential for emotional impact. Then there were two more. The dark tourists and those who were actually affected, a very low number, only 7 out of the thousands. Many visitors with prior knowledge expected more interpretation and were disappointed. I quote, "No info on the massacre of the Jews. What a pity." Others projected their own emotional commitment onto the site, like, "We found it quite moving to visit as we knew about the massacre of the York Jews before we went." Some engaged in religious commemoration. I quote, "We came and said prayers for the souls of the dead." There were visitors who demonstrated potential for effect, responding to the site's history with reflective empathy. Like, "The story of the Jews who were besieged there and chose a fiery suicide. It's particularly poignant." And there were obviously the dark tourists, and ultimately 7 reviews displayed a clear emotional impact. But in summary, on the surface, the low number of affected reviews seems to verify Uzzell's premonition. However, the close reading of the reviews proves that some visitors display the potential for hot cognition despite the temporal distance of the site. Question arises 2 questions. Can the distant reading pick it up? And also, are visitors affected by distant violence under different curation? The Mary Rose Museum demonstrates that they are. The Mary Rose visitors delivered what the curators wanted. They showed a balance between contemplating the lost lives and embodying this immersive experience. Most of the reviews praise it, with visitors often expressing a mix of emotions and embodied reactions due to the immersive curatorial techniques. And separating the awe effect from the empathy for the perished crew was very difficult, as these feelings were likely blurred for the visitors themselves too. Out of the 3,000 reviews, 105 reflected on the crew's fate. Visitors often described sensory embodiment. I quote, "You could experience the smells and sounds on board. It was an eerie experience." Or, "The atmospheric noise of the creaking wood and sea and the projected pictures of life on board were thrilling." There were also the sights also induced strong reactions. "The first glimpse of the ship brought goosebumps." Or, "For me, the sight was overwhelming. She took my words away." Many reviews showed a blend of awe and contemplative reflection on the lost crew. Visitors appreciated the humanized storytelling. I quote, "We love the displays with reference to real people who had worked on board. It made it so easy to relate to." Or, "They tell the stories of the crew in ways that help you understand their lives." Or, "A recurring theme was the sense of the crew being, I quote, brought to life through images and sounds. Like, very atmospheric, bearing in mind over 500 people lost their lives in her." Acknowledging the crew's lives went hand in hand with recognizing their death. Quote, "You end up feeling for the lost sailors and wondering in awe at both the ways they lived and died." Or, "It is also a memorial to the crew, of whom over 400 lost their lives." And the story of Hash the dog also resonated emotionally. I quote, "Sadly, they have a skeleton of a dog found inside the cabin doorway, awaiting his master's return." And many visitors describe the museum as stunningly moving, absolutely absorbing, and thought-provoking. So in summary, the Mary Rose Museum's curation successfully guided the visitors' emotional and intellectual engagement based on the close reading. And beyond the overwhelming sensory experience, visitors expressed genuine compassion for those who perished on board in the 16th century. About the last case study. So it was methodologically slippery because I did not consider that the museum will get general reviews and not only reacting to the rooms, from the 740, only 27 reviews explicitly reference the Medieval Massacre room. But I didn't omit the case study entirely. I just didn't use it in comparison because the language they used was extremely outstanding. And I was interested in what the computer can pick up from it. Because the majority of these reviews showed a sign of affect, with the especially overwhelming use of gory expressions, which are absolutely infrequent in the operative TripAdvisor context, okay? This is dark and vivid language revealing visceral reactions shaped by embodied sensations. It uses like disturbing, grim, brutal, haunting, gruesome, shattered, and foreboding. There was one which said that there is nothing like skulls with holes in them to remind you how these people died. We are still talking about TripAdvisor. So it's, yeah, you see, it's unusual, so it should be picked up with the language analysis. And it can be a sign of potential affect. Besides that, visitors mentioned the immersive experience of the projected films, battle sounds, and vivid visual displays. For some, this sensory input transformed into deeper emotional reflection on the horror and tragedy of warfare. One reviewer even suggests that the exhibit could turn military personnel into anti-war advocates. But not all the reactions were positive. Some visitors expressed discomfort, fear, or moral unease, feeling the display of human remains is disrespectful. Yet even these critical responses indicate a form of emotional engagement. Because it's showing compassion for the individuals represented. So ultimately, the exhibit's curation successfully provokes an emotional and ethical response, aligning with their intentions, making historical trauma feel immediate and personal. And overall, this TripAdvisor close reading demonstrates that this large-scale data, even though it's extant, can be a valid tool for studying heritage effect. But the next step is exploring whether these reactions can be captured through distant reading methods. So, what we have seen so far, that we have 3 case studies with 3 different curatorial techniques. And based on the close reading, the qualitative analysis, the audiences are mostly reacting to them as expected. So then, when I did the emotion detection and plotted the frequency of emotions appearing in the reviews, I expected to see 3 different results. But after plotting the mirrors against the Clifford tower, the results seemed almost identical, which were one of the biggest differences in my case studies. So, the problem is that the close reading and the distant reading contradict each other. While the close reading, as we have seen, pinpointed 3 different reactions, the distant reading washed them together, as the emotion detection, while very reliable, was not valid. But the method is widely used without this type of reflection, without some triangulation in several studies, and it's even integrated into text analysis software, like Orange, without ever actually reacting to the problem with its validity. And that's what I would like to dissect a bit more in the following. So about the emotion detection. To understand what went wrong, let's see how this particular emotion detection I used works. It's a rule-based, lexicon-based approach, where each word as a key has attributed emotion values in the dictionary. And the script checks the corpus against this dictionary to come up with a score. Okay? One of the largest emotion dictionaries is the so-called Emolex, which was a Canadian state-funded project funded by the Canadian National Research Council. It was a project of Dr. Mohammed, and it's widely used. It's one of the largest lexicons which we have, and it's called NRC-Lex. But it was a crowdsourced lexicon. It is still, because the last update of it was in 2022. And crowdsourced meaning that the volunteers labeled the words, who in theory were supposed to follow the 8 base emotions of the Plutchik wheel. So we now have to skip again to a different disciplinary field, to psychology, because we have to understand how the Plutchik wheel works and how it wants us to represent the scale of human emotions which we feel. It's an almost outdated, or at least complemented and criticized understanding of emotions, in which we have 8 base emotions: joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, and disgust, anger, and anticipation. But it does not stop here. The theory doesn't stop here. Because all of these base emotions have lower and higher intensity versions, such as annoyance is the lower intensity version of anger, and rage is the higher intensity pair of it. But sometimes, as you can see, these are not self-explanatory, such as boredom being the low intensity pair of disgust in the theory. And it still doesn't stop here. Based on the combination of the base emotions, there can be multiple dyads. Like according to Plutchik, joy and trust will result together in the emotion of love, or surprise and disgust in unbelief, and so on and so on. So we already see that even the theory is solid, it is not self-explanatory at all. So volunteers would need to keep very rigidly to the Plutchik rules to have a consistent dictionary, which is used later for the emotion detection. But unfortunately, the rules the volunteers had to follow were never published, so we don't necessarily know how they worked. And we can also question how solid or universally applicable the theory is. As in psychology, this categorical understanding is just one version of emotion research. And today's the research tends towards a more dimensional theory of emotions. However, what happened here is that the Plutchik wheel applies a categorical model of emotions, which is convenient for computational labeling methods. Therefore, it was a popular way to develop algorithms for emotion detection with the help of this model, as it's easy to turn into a lexicon for computational labeling methods. But if we have then this lexicon, which describes complexity of human emotions, then with a few lines of code, you can analyze basically any corpus for emotions, at least in theory. Or can you really? In the examined cases, I found that scoring the reviews against Emolex did not bring valid results for identifying the emotions the visitors might have felt as established by the qualitative analysis. It was very repeatable. It was very consistent, with very little variance. But the frequency of the detected emotions was so similar in all the cases that it looked as if they were measured about the same site, despite the apparent difference, which I detailed in the first part of this presentation, discovered during the analysis of the reviews. And then I was wondering, what is behind this? And I attribute it to 3 main reasons. Firstly, the crowdsourced labels did not always match the heritage context. Like, it's an outsider example of this case study, but black is labeled as sad. Now imagine if you are reading reviews about Black Heritage Month, it will distort the results entirely. Or secondly, the lexicon did not calculate with the dyads, okay? Like dyads, I mean like disappointment, curiosity, remorse, which are more prominently felt emotions in the case of heritage visits than the base emotions, okay? Remorse for paying the ticket prices, for example, or curiosity for what they are seeing will appear more times than trust, okay? Finally, sometimes the higher or lower intensity versions of an other base emotion were more appropriate for the given heritage context. Like instead of sadness, it would it would be better to use boredom. But that's a lower intensity version of disgust. And on your gut feeling, you don't necessarily label something as disgust if you want to achieve boredom, if you are not following the rules about intensity in the Plutchik wheel. So after getting the first round of horrible results, I wanted to somehow solve it and mitigate it. What I did was I extracted that portion of the lexicon which was relevant to my corpus. It was about 2,000 words. And I relabeled them following very strict rules. Firstly, focusing on the dyads. That was always the ultimate goal. Like if we have the word adore, then we should add joy and trust as labels, because that will lead to love on the secondary level, which is the closest emotion to adore, even if we would choose another base emotion. Secondly, I considered the intensity of the base emotions. Like in many cases, as I mentioned, I added disgust, because boredom, which is super relevant in heritage reviews, because of course we are seeing more negative reviews than positive reviews in all the cases, was its less intense version. And finally, I focused on the heritage context of the terms. And it's again very important. Like helmet would be a neutral word in the lexicon. But when you put it in the Stockholm context, then a helmet, with holes in it and a skull inside, it's fear, it's anger. It can be so many other things, or indicative of so many other things, which is not captured on the general Plutchik wheel. So context matters. So after manually relabeling every word, it was a manual process, I would like to emphasize that, in the relevant portion of the dictionary, my workflow looked that way, that I rerun the whole research. And I also modified the code to be able to calculate emotion scores for the dyads too. Because before that, the package was able to use, NRClex was able to use only the base emotions. So you don't even get scores for the dyads. Then I visualized the results with the otherwise absolutely brilliant PyPlutchik package. It's a beautiful data visualization tool. And I thought I've solved it. I really had the hope until I saw the results. And, even after fine-tuning the lexicon, the results did not match the finding of the close reading. As you can see, there was still no significant difference between the emotions in the reviews where it should have been. There's very minimal alteration between these three case studies. It pointed out the same combination of emotions with very, very low visibility in all the cases, not only in the base emotions, but also at the dyads. So why is it? First, of course, it was a trial solution, and I might have needed more relabeling, or my relabeling was incorrect, and maybe it's still just a lexical problem, which is absolutely a possibility. But if we go beyond this, I think one reason is that this type of research is a very, very tautological method, which we encounter quite frequently when we think of data as an abstract silo detached from the real world. So many times we find what we are searching for in the data set because we set the rules, but it does not necessarily represent reality. So for example, I mean that even if a script confidently finds all the mentions of chocolate ice cream in children's books, it cannot claim that it can predict children's ice cream preferences. Okay? Finding 8 base emotions confidently and repeatedly in a set of data cannot necessarily claim that it represents human emotions. So I warn against this tautology. Secondly, my portion of the relabeled data might have been also wrong or not enough, but it points out the bigger problem with the lexicon and with these approaches, that how careful we have to be with crowdsourcing in some foundational stages of studies and research, like lexicon labeling. It makes or breaks the whole research, the quality of the lexicon. And we have to consider that the volunteer is not free labor and not necessarily an expert. They can become experts later, but it's more about the labor aspect, because it comes with a lot of attached packages. Like, you cannot expect them to very closely follow super tedious tasks, like labeling random words based on an obscure emotion theory, when they came to citizen science for passion. And I can tell you from experience that labeling the lexicon, following the Plutchik rules, was boring and required a lot of attention. But I didn't do it in my free time. So you can't expect it from the volunteers. Thirdly, the Plutchik theory might not be the best option for recording the heritage of fact. And we need more nuanced emotion labels and heritage-specific dictionaries or even ontologies. Because even in the field of human emotions, which looks universal, there is no one-size-fits-all. And finally, affect is such a flexible composite that rigidly structured approaches might not bring valid results, even with revised lexicons. So perhaps it's worth going with unsupervised methods to see what the algorithm sees as building blocks of different effects, instead of forcing our categories on the machine. And I have some suggestions on how to try it again, like obviously a heritage-specific lexicon, or just teach the rule-based method or this lexicon-based method, and just use ML classification, whatever algorithms, SVMs or random forests, to see if you train it to find labels, will it do a better job than if we are labeling them ourselves. Or find some type of unsupervised clustering, which was promising, and perhaps try to quantify the error. I intentionally didn't do it now, because I really wanted to focus on, can qualitative control quantitative? I didn't want to rely solely on numbers, but perhaps to prove my point better, we might have to build a confusion matrix for this to see. It's worth noting that NRC-LEX is just a raw frequency score. It has no built-in accuracy measurement. And I don't necessarily know if you get a F1 score, what it would tell us about the method. But it might be worth looking into building a confusion matrix to see what the human supervisor would think label and affect, or affected review, and what the machine find it affective review. Yeah. So what we have seen here, I think that considering revising the heritage theory, it looks like I succeeded. It's nice. Because I think I proved that you can feel for the medieval tragedies if exhibited well. I also seem to prove that extant data, such as TripAdvisor, can replace or complement interview data. However, I don't think it is safe to use distant reading for emotion detection in this particular case. And stemming from that discussion, I would just warn against using off-the-shelf methods, off-the-shelf packages and software without understanding what and how it does. As we have seen when rolling back Imolex, it was clear that it wasn't valid for my research, despite it was a reliable method in itself. So my main takeaway is that, especially in the slippery field of digital humanities. When we cannot be experts in each angle of our research, we have to pay extra attention if the method, the data, and the results match to ensure both reliability and validity. In this case, I use qualitative analysis to triangulate my quantitative one because it was doable. I had not too much data, but it's not possible in all of the cases. So I'm opening the question, what else can we do? Or which one should control which one? We like to argue for blurred boundaries between the two, qualitative and quantitative, but how to resolve the conflicting situations like this? And I'm really open to your suggestions on this topic. One of my suggestions, which resonates with some authors of the book I mentioned in the beginning, is to develop methods in interdisciplinary teams, where the possible uses, the interpretation, the hermeneutics are embedded in the process of developing the tools to avoid these tautological outcomes. It's not enough to have a research software engineer. It's important that we understand what we are doing and why we are doing it on both sides. And overall, my main message is that we can't do it alone. And due to the interdisciplinary boundaries, we like to consider blurred. But in reality, many times they provide very serious obstacles. We have to work together and exchange expertise to ensure the quality of the research that we do. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Now we have quite a lot of time for questions, actually. So please go ahead. We have microphone people running around. If you have a very loud voice, then you can probably manage it without. We have first question there.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really engaging and interesting to listen to. I have a question. Have you or are you planning to look at the country of origin of the people who write the reviews? Because I think this might also have an effect on the emotional or the effective words or effective ways of reacting to these events. Also because, you know, some nationalities are widely known for being more emotional than the others, and also because local people visiting the heritage sites might feel more emotional connections to the events that happened there, even if they happened in the medieval times.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good advice. I wanted to stir a bit away from this time and geographical distance, because Uzzell considered them the two work together, and they create a barrier between reacting or not reacting. And I wanted to see if the storytelling has a major impact. But I still see why it would be important to know if it was indeed a factor in the research. However, you cannot extract this type of information, or I couldn't extract this type of information from the reviews. It's mostly you can filter it for the language. So I used not machine translated English language reviews.
I think you were next, probably.
Yeah. May I ask? Yes. Okay. Thank you
Thank
for the engaging talk.
Hands up, please. Where are you?
Oh, here. Yes.
Hi.
Yes. Hello. I'm Mark
Hi.
from Tallinn University. So thank you for the engaging talk. And for me, it brought to mind problem or the aspect of life that we live among these categories that are often predefined for us. For example, these emotional projects categories. And that in some case, the people don't fit into these categories, right? So for the people who did this crowdsourcing, then for them it was not an easy task because it was not maybe intuitive categories. So there are actually some studies that try to approach it a bit differently. For example, with the valence, arousal, dominance, this sort of distinctions that there's been people who looked for the orthogonality within it. So there's people who take this. So there's people who, take this vocabulary, say that okay, this word has this sort of level of arousal or level of dominance, so on. But in the end, the output, you see that okay, it's not exactly orthogonal. These are not the three characteristics that describe it the best. And then actually, what they found that what people describe most in some cases, like there's sort of the level of power safety or like power and danger and like this sort of different kind of axis, not that you would actually expect or not what the people were given. So this seems like exciting sort of more inductive way of finding out what actual categories are. And these are probably like really cultural dependent, I imagine, because they ended up with the dictionary that is, describes the English, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A Canadian one. A Canadian English. That might be also a difference.
Okay, yeah. Even more so.
Thank you very much. You are very right. And it would be very interesting to see if there is a way to mitigate this type of uncertainty after the lexicon was done, or if we can do it only while building it. What do you think? Can we?
Yeah, exactly. That how in that case the osiometrics, I think, it's connected to that. So how in that case how it was done, that it was already constructed, and then they sort of changed it and ended up with a new dictionary, sort of with the new values, and so which is cool. It's like nothing is wasted. You can find new truth in it, new categories.
Yeah, there is already an update to the dictionary which adds an extra scoring about the intensity. So this is always in progress. The trouble is that the tools we are using are not necessarily catching up with these versions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think in the middle you were next, and then, one of you.
I'll hand it to you afterwards. Thank you for the very intriguing presentation. I have two technical questions. The first one, did you apply the emotion detection to single topics from your topic model or to the entire data as a whole? Okay, the second question, did you have a control data set to detect which emotions generally occur in reviews on TripAdvisor?
I'm planning to do that because I need that, but I haven't run that. My research was halted by the fact that the emotion detection didn't work. And then I changed path and tried to figure out why and dealt more with revising the lexicon. But if I will finish this research, I definitely will need a control data set to see what are the general emotions. The topic modeling picks them up quite nicely. So they are mostly frustration and operational issues. Mostly negative if you do a sentiment analysis on them. I did that, but I didn't repeat it, the research with a control data set. Sorry, your first question was, I did not do on the topics because it's my personal relationship with topic modeling that I like to use it as indicative for myself to see what's going on in the data, but I would not necessarily rely on the categories it sets for me.
Okay, yeah, my idea behind the question was that maybe there are a lot of reviews that aren't really targeted to your question in the dataset that have similar emotions regardless of the
that was
site.
the case most likely, yeah.
Okay,
because the base emotions are so general that they will be the same discussions. So you cannot use it necessarily for this type of emotion. Yes, you are right.
Thank you for the presentation. Actually, I have quite a similar, it's just a continuation for the last question, basically, is that I guess it's more of a comment, but I guess it would be interesting if you factored in the platformization of the impact of platformization in case of TripAdvisor to the uniformity of language when dealing with reviews in general. In certain cases, that might be helpful in terms of understanding the kind of uniformity.
Could you please elaborate on it?
my idea is that if you are going to make a review on TripAdvisor, you, I guess, subconsciously, or I don't know, maybe adhere to certain genre rules, or you rely on some kind of like previous reviews on about the museum or whatever, and I just and also I guess it's also not just TripAdvisor, but in general when you give commentary in on the internet, because most of the commentaries you give are on social media, or you make a post, and that there's a certain type of affective logic to your statements when you speak up in on different platforms. That's my point.
Yeah. They have a format and they must follow a discourse. I understand that, but still, I use them only as a proxy or a prompt to see if there are spikes in the discussion which are unusual in the relevant formats. Also, to avoid just generally measuring the emotions of reviews, it would be interesting to contrast them to interview data to see how they are picking up different type of emotions or different type of language or discourse. This would be another research which would actually decide if TripAdvisor can be used properly in this case, not only if it's just an accidental result which we are seeing. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, comments? Yes? Would you like the microphone? Okay, microphone.
It's coming from the top.
Thank you. One topic of us, I was wondering of, also kind of also touched in the previous comment, that when you gather data from social networks, one of the problems is that people might not always write what they actually think. And then I thought perhaps such sites as TripAdvisor from this perspective might be more reliable, as people, I assume, tend to write honestly what they were experiencing and on these type of portals. But my question was more about emotions and this Platonic wheel. What were your considerations or arguments for using this specific method? As there are other, like there's this Geneva wheel of emotions, which does not treat some emotions as primary. All emotions are just equal, and you can also just plot your emotion words on there. So
yeah.
The main question is about that.
I didn't choose it, and that's the trick. That's the trick in the research, that I also think that there are more reliable or better models for modeling emotions, but the lexicon, which the research was based on, used this. And all the extra packages which were developed for it, like the visualization tool, is already embedded in the Platonic wheel. So this is the method we are rolling with because it was convenient to use. Because you can see it's very easy. We have categories, we have dictionary, then I take it. And I think this is, again, an operational problem, a collaboration issue that those who develop the lexicon and the method has to correspond with those who develop the theory to figure out which will represent actually what and what can we find if we run this code. And the first question about honesty, you are right. I still feel that TripAdvisor is semi-anonymous enough because it's not your own platform, but a collective platform, especially if you are really taking the time weeks after your visit to reflect emotively on the experience that you really want to express that, and not necessarily you are doing it for the show. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation, first of all. I wanted to perhaps ask a bit more about the interdisciplinarity. So you ended your presentation with the kind of call for interdisciplinary collaboration. So could you say a bit more about that? So you started with the computational humanities book about barriers, interdisciplinary issues, and so forth. So, of course, in an ideal world, and what we are discussing here a lot, it's a kind of classic question in digital humanities. So, how do we engage into interdisciplinary collaboration? Where are the barriers? It might be resource questions. So, how would you go about from here? I mean, in your case, for example.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, it needs a research team. And it needs a research team from the scratch. So from deciding what emotion to choose or what emotion model to choose, what would be the appropriate way to research it. Then talking with the research software engineers about what would be the use of this case. So I always think about in a full pipeline of a project to avoid redundancy or not corresponding. So if we plan from the beginning to actually the preservation and maintenance of the project, that's one way, so a long-term vision. Secondly, when I mean disciplinary barriers, I mostly mean institutional ones. So sometimes one department is not talking with the other one, even though we are doing very similar research. It divides the funding. So if you are sitting in humanities, you might get less funding to do the same project than if you are sitting in informatics, due to how the institutional budget works. Also, we don't learn from the beginning to talk each other's languages, and we are talking very different languages. And many of us just arrives in this interdisciplinary field thinking that, okay, if I mean that it's a glass of water, then it will be a glass of water for everyone, but it is not. So it needs a type of communication which also has to be developed, which is based on a mutual respect, that I don't try to explain to you what your field is, but I still open to listen to how do you see this problem. And it many times it comes down to an interdisciplinary, interpersonal or sometimes cultural, institutional cultural or disciplinary cultural way of communicating. Like this book puts it brilliantly, the difference of steering away from the code bro and from the elitist humanities scholar, sitting in the library. So these are models which are wrong. And in reality, to solve these problems, we really have to sit there and, now tell me what this equation does. Okay, but then tell me why you want to represent that type of emotion and why the categorical is not good for you. Okay, this is what I'm thinking about. Is it answering your question?
May I add very briefly?
Please.
So now we have humanities, computer science kind of triangle. Could we have cultural heritage also as a kind of how do you see that?
You must choose the disciplines which are relevant to the project. Okay, you cannot develop everything in it. Of course, we have to start the conversation somewhere. But of course, if you have a project which gained a big funding to do a heritage informatics issue, then sure, please try to see what disciplines are involved in that interdisciplinary field like heritage, which is actually turning towards to be disciplinary more and more. We can start a discussion about that too.
Could you send the microphone like 2 rows northeast? Thanks.
I just wanted to go back to the TripAdvisor for a quick minute. Have you ever wondered and tried to check other comments left by the same person? Is it possible in TripAdvisor? Maybe the person, because you can see that on Google Maps, maybe the person just leaves a specific type of comments in general. Like maybe a person is very emotional, and even when I leave a comment, usually that is a positive comment because I don't allocate my time to write a bad review. So maybe they are just in general emotional, and how that could play into the emotions of, reviewing what emotions were left by the exhibition.
I understand your point. On the one hand, it's very, very difficult to collect the data this way. And not tracking the individual. It's different type of data collection. On the other hand, does it really change the result? If you are an emotional person and I want to measure how people react to heritage sites, it means you are more emotional on the heritage site too, isn't it? So if it's part of, your function, then you are just moving it. Just now, it's in a review or in the heritage site. So I don't think it would add an extra layer to the research, which would worth exploring. But if you can argue further for it, I'm happy to try.
But that means that the storytelling basically is relevant, because I'm an emotional person. So whether you have a good storytelling or like a grim storytelling, like not non-existent, I came prepared. So hence, I am very emotionally attached to the.
I think it's distributed. I think those who are doing the storytelling knows that their audience will be perceived differently. If you, for example, see the otherwise absolutely not affected reviews, the York ones, there are people, you can basically see the scale, who are the, beautiful view, Tajik story. There was a review like this, really. And there were those who were crying, okay? You know that there will be different visitors at your site, different times of their day, different personal, struggles they are bringing, that it will impact it. It might not be a constant value in this case.
So basically, if I can translate, I think what you were saying is that people have different intercepts, which could be modeled if you had the data.
Yeah, that can be a new research. Would you like to do it with me?
if you're into stats. Okay. Yes. Did you have? You don't have a question. Okay. You did. Okay. So I think you were first, and then you second.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. Thank you. And I guess I'm jumping back a bit to the interdisciplinary question. So, yeah, I totally agree with, like, we need a team, we need a better project for that. But it means, like, the future for this digital humanities is more like we do the teamwork. Is it also the solution of we, like me and my computer, when we can do something good enough? Or is it more like we have to have a team somehow?
It's a very good question, and of course, always have a team. But I also advocate for, and I'm actually a volunteer in this field of teaching humanities people to code, which is basically just breaking down the barriers that, oh, I'm not a maths person. These are myths. So I think if people who are in institutional level are studying digital humanities has the chance to get the double type of education, which would bring them to be a more, as Marisa Terras would say, an M-shaped or T-shaped person, to at least have the affinity to understand what the team member is going to say, okay? And don't be closed off from this at all. Digital is not my field. I'm the theory person here. And, for example, digital humanities trainings at universities are the only place where you can do it, unless you let students to choose and get equal training in both computation and the humanities subjects. One of the authors of the book I mentioned at the beginning points out that it's extremely difficult, especially if you try to explore an underrepresented or vulnerable subject like, ethnic studies or Black studies, that consumes up too much time and that isolated silos at the education that next to it, you cannot pick a computer science minor in most of the cases. So it mostly works on either with an affinity for extracurricular training and also built in digital humanities programs.
Thank you.
I think there was a question back there. So can we diagonally raise your hand so the microphone can travel to you?
Thank you for the presentation. Here's a goofy thought for your amusement. It relates to the interdisciplinary idea, but like, why stop there? I imagine the different disciplines, they typically have different ways of thinking how to tackle a problem. I've seen a few talks where people study affect and emotions. For digital humanities, humanists naturally go to TripAdvisor or novel corpus, or having an introspective memory questionnaire. Mm-hmm. But if you ask a psychologist, they say, of course we put people in a lab, put EEG hats on, or into a functional MRI and show them these images or something. So would there be some kind of laboratory humanities in addition to digital? I wonder.
If we have experimental archaeology, why not have experimental digital humanities? I guess so.
I guess the answer is yes. Okay, can you send the microphone all the way back now? Thank you.
Hello, thank you for an interesting talk. Just going back to the emotion detection, like you could have a sequence of 7 pretty neutral words expressing a strong emotion, but if you use a lexical approach, you're focusing on the single words.
Yeah.
I mean, another option would be to have a categorization, but leverage the knowledge from an LLM, the contextual knowledge from an LLM to detect an emotion, for instance, which would be less transparent, but probably more accurate. What's your thought on the balance between transparency and accuracy?
I don't know where I stand, but with the transparent model didn't work. Then let's see if it works with the black box. I agree. I have a strong feeling that it would come up with better results. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna use my powers as moderator to jump in here because that was I was gonna ask also about. So you took quite a while to describe the shortcomings of this lexicon-based method, which has been used, but has in many cases now been superseded by the machine learning, large language model applications. So why not do these things that have been shown that work better for both sentiment analysis and stance detection?
Yeah, it should be. I forgot to add it to my slide, basically, that I think that would be a suggestion of mine to trial it. The only thing which I would be concerned is what you mentioned, the transparency. Not all the cases we know how we got to that result. But in the case of affect, we have no idea what affect is. So I think it's fair to go with the generated sense on what affect is. It's the next stage of the research to check how transformers work in this situation.
I mean, that sounds like a theory question. Then. Like, do you have a good theory effect which you can then translate into a machine learning model?
I don't. Do you have?
So that's
we have
an
to look
ongoing
into
process.
this. We have to look into this. There is dimensional understanding of emotions when they are turning into each other or have multiple sides instead of being these strict composites. That would be a better way to go for this type of research. You mentioned the Geneva one. What is that one? Someone mentioned the Geneva emotions. How does that work? Yeah.
It's similar, but it doesn't distinguish the primary emotions, just the wheel of emotions, and you can work similarly, but it just it's slightly different in its own.
Okay. So perhaps not that one, but the dimensional one, yes.
Any more questions? Maybe someone in the back. Cool kids in the back. I mean, I have more questions.
Please.
So maybe I misunderstood, but when you were presenting it, it felt like there's a bit of a disconnect between what you did in the manual what you call close reading,
yeah,
and what you did in the computational lexicon-based stuff. So the first part to me actually seemed more like stance detection. It's a stance of people towards this exhibition, whereas in the computation part, which you said doesn't quite match, maybe it makes sense that it doesn't match because that seemed more like sentiment analysis, just generic sentiment. And if you do generic sentiment using just words, then they might not match with the results of a stance detection analysis. So, is there any reason you did them differently, or what's behind it?
Yeah, the reason I did differently is I use that type of very traditional discourse analysis, how you would work with this type of data if you are a non-digital heritage researcher. And then I try to find an equivalent, and the closest to pointing out these emotions was the lexicon-based approach. And I didn't know how you would do in this situation the stance analysis. How would that go?
I mean, it's like a whole different literature, stance detection. It's often also done on reviews.
Okay.
It also has applications in private sector because people want to know, like, just like you're interested in how people feel about an exhibition, people might be interested in how you feel about my product, not if the review is just generically happy or sad, but like specifically about something.
Yeah, that might be a better solution. I should definitely look into if it get comparable closer. However, it still doesn't dismiss the fact that emotion detection claims that it can detect emotions, and it didn't applicable in every case.
So that's the question. Like, what's the research question? Is it like generally emotion in this piece of text in this review, or is it emotion about this thing? So imagine somebody could say, "Oh, I had such a happy day. I was so happy, but then I went to the shitty exposition, and I didn't really like it." Then the average emotion is somewhere like happy or happy-ish. Whereas about this specific aspect, it would be negative.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I should repeat that way as well.
Okay. Meanwhile, any other questions? Because I think we still have time until lunch, a little bit. Yes, a few minutes. So I want to like hog the floor. Oh, yeah. Somebody, I saw a hand. Yes. Yeah, okay, the microphone is coming.
Hello, I just wanted to add a small contribution to the discussion about using an LLM, because we did a much smaller project where we compared a keyword search to using an LLM to detect emotions in literature, in French literature, and we found indeed that the LLM was much more effective. But this is maybe a general question to everyone. The thing is, because it's a black box, can you really publish those results? Like, can you actually use that? Is it a toy, or could you actually use that in, could you publish it like in this article here?
I let the audience answer this question because
I haven't answered this.
Yeah, please, Andres.
But go ahead.
No, just because I also have the same concern about the problem. So, what would you answer?
Well, I would provocatively ask: is a large language model more of a black box than Andrea?
Yeah.
Are these things really more black boxes than human annotators?
Yeah. That's a good answer.
I would like to add, though, that in the case of ChatGPT, it actually is, because we don't know how it was trained and we can't ask.
I don't know how you were trained either.
No, but at least you can ask and I can respond. But if you use open source model with published open research about how it was trained and that publish the data sets as well, then
nobody
I
publishes
think
the
it's better.
data sets.
Yeah,
It's
but perhaps they will. If they did so, you would be in a better situation, at least, I think.
So would you be willing to go through, let's say, 10 billion words of training data or 100 billion words of training data to...
No, you won't get 100% knowledge, but you will get a better knowledge. That's my point. If you use an open source model instead of a ChatGPT model.
I mean, yeah, open source is always nice. I think everybody can probably agree. Question there? Can you send the microphone kind of there?
Thank you.
You have two.
Thank you for the nice talk. I really enjoyed your talk. There is one thing that I thought about while I was in the pedal slide, and I'm not really sure if it's a question, comment. It's maybe just a comment, but or maybe this one. So you said that this result was not something that you were expecting. Well, you were expecting something different.
Yeah.
And then my question is: imagine that this plot showed exactly what you wanted. Do you think that all of this thinking process would have arisen?
You are very tricky here.
Yeah. So
because
I'm the devil's advocate. Sorry.
No, you are absolutely right. This is the thing. I started to deal with what's wrong with the method. Only I didn't receive the result I wanted. So I went through the tautological research myself. And that happens many times that you don't ask yourself, is my results reliable? So we might have many of these research. I just stopped and tried to figure out what's wrong. But you are very right with this question. If I don't get it, I would just publish it as it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Question there? Okay, that's just take this one. travel. Yeah.
Another goofy idea for your amusement. Let's call it the Blue Lard GPT. So if it's about the LLMs, and if you wonder what would Voltaire write on TripAdvisor for Disneyland, you can train like 50, 100 different models for different authors. But my real thinking is there, the methodology affects, it implicitly defines what kind of phenomena you're actually trying to study, right? If you have all these famous authors in novels writing about different sites, then it's very different from gathering comments about parking lots.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, 2 more minutes until lunch. Any more quick questions, comments? Over there. Is there a microphone on this side?
Hi, and thank you so much for your presentation. So maybe I missed this, but did the emotion model you used, does that incorporate valence as well, or just intensity?
Just intensity.
Okay, so would valence be something that would be relevant for you? Maybe intensity, I mean, feels more relevant to the hot coldness.
Intensity, by intensity, it was not the type of intensity that how much you feel this emotion. So here, intensity is actually a terminus technicus, which differentiates between different categories in this sense, okay? And I think that's messy in this model. It's not my model, that's what the lexicon was using. That, here is it, loathing and boredom are considered to be on one intensity. But it's not exactly a score, it's not a scale, these are categories. And the new lexicon uses them as scores and not categories again. So you will never get, I don't know, destruction and amazement as different emotional categories you can feel.
Okay, yeah. I was just thinking, a lot of like modern affect science incorporates the valence aspect as well. Would that be relevant for your research?
Yeah, potentially. That would be, thank you. Yeah.
Now it is lunchtime, so I would encourage to continue these conversations over lunch. But before I forget, here's a customary bag of random things.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.